Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Today I'm speaking with Chris Monö, speaker, author, and Sweden's first and only followership expert. He has spent more than 15 years exploring what he calls natural followership and how the leadership industry is affecting people, businesses, and societies. Among his clients are the Swedish Armed Forces, and he has a new book coming out in English in 2024, so watch out for that. I am very intrigued by Chris's idea of natural followership because it seems to be a really powerful way to both demystify this concept and also make it super accessible. He has a very unique perspective that I haven't seen anywhere else, so I'm very eager to learn more. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. You have spent many years with this provocative question, what makes me want to follow? I would love you to share with listeners how you got started on this journey.
I started in 2007, and it was actually a relative of mine who got me interested in this topic. He's retired now, but he was a bus driver, and he started off driving buses, and then he worked himself up the corporate ladder and eventually became head of communications. So he did everything right. And then after a few years, he felt this wasn't for him. He really liked driving buses. So he decided to quit his job. And this kind of surprised everyone. But he quit his job, went back to driving buses. And as he's sitting behind the wheel, he realizes that for, I don't know how many years he was working as a manager, but throughout the time he was working as a manager, he was constantly told how important leadership is. But then when he was driving his bus, he kind of figured that everything he was doing had a direct impact on the passengers. So he asked me, because we like to have these kind of discussions, so he asked me, this is really interesting. How come we only talk about leadership, but we never talk about followership? And this got me really, really interested. Mm-hmm. I basically turned on my computer that same day. And I started Googling, followership. And I quickly learned that there was very little out there in this topic. And in Sweden, they didn't even have the word followership. Mm-hmm. So I ended up spending months, I think, at Stockholm University Library, just going through anything I could find on followership. And most of it was focused on managers and employees. And that's not what I was interested in. I was kind of interested in what makes people want to follow someone else. So that was my take on it. And because I couldn't find anything that really answered that question properly, I remember taking a piece of paper and I wrote on it, what makes me want to follow someone else? Mm-hmm. Because I figured that if I could understand that would be a starting point for me to dig deeper into what drives us to follow. And I didn't know it at the time, but this was a really important decision for me. Mm-hmm. Because 99% of all books written about leadership, and I dare say a majority of books written about followership, target this topic from a leader perspective. So it's usually about how do you get people to follow you? Mm-hmm. What do followers need in order to be good at what they do, etc. So my question, what makes me want to follow someone else, had a different approach. So it was more of a follower perspective. It was sort of like opening a Pandora's box. It was just all these different questions that I couldn't answer with traditional leadership theories. And that's how I sort of ended up focusing on what later became natural followership.
I really appreciate you pointing out that even followership books, the few that there are, many of them are still focused on like benefit to the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Follow in a way that supports my leader. I mean, not all of them, right? There's definitely some work out there that's incredible, and we profiled a lot of it on the podcast. But it's a good thing to watch out for, right? Because we're so inundated with the leader-centric thinking that sometimes we don't even notice it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I would love to go right into this idea of natural leadership and followership.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us into your thinking on this and how it may be different from other ways of understanding followership?
A lot of people define follower as someone who is a subordinate. Not everyone, but a lot of people do that, especially people who do not work with followership have this kind of definition. And I don't share it. And the reason I don't share it is because I have this natural followership perspective. So what's natural followership? It's the process of exploring how people instinctively and naturally follow each other without being guided by any formal rules or regulations. So to give you an example, it's easier to explain it with an example.
Please.
Like the workplace, that's not a natural environment.
Mm-hmm.
The army is not a natural environment. The political arena is not a natural environment. And even the sports teams, they're not natural. And they're not natural because they organize people and they guide people with the use of rules, regulations, and contracts, etc. Now, when you socialize with your friends, on the other hand, you do that without any formal rules, hopefully. So probably your interaction is guided by values, and that's a completely different thing. Most families, I hope, are guided by the same. We don't have a CEO at home, so we have these environments where we work and function together without any sort of formal structure, and that's where I've sort of put my attention, because that's where I believe we can find the true nature of followership, the why and how we follow each other.
I kind of love this because it's really asking us to consider that followership may be the primary driving force in groups, not leadership, which is, I must say, a pretty radical reversal. I mean, in the end, both roles are present in some form, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But what you're saying here at the outset about how we all organically follow each other left to our own devices, that being the main thing to understand, that's pretty illuminating. And I know you did a lot of research outside the conventional canon of business and management literature to arrive at this conclusion. So could you give us a little of that background to help us see followership and leadership through your eyes a bit more?
Absolutely. When I was sitting there with my question, what makes me want to follow someone else, I try to understand where do I start and what is a natural environment. And I went back to social anthropology, which was a subject I'd studied at university. And Homo sapiens is we're around 300,000 years old as a species. So for 280,000 years, we've lived in these small so-called egalitarian band societies. These are small societies, about 20 to 40 individuals. They're nomadic hunters and gatherers, and they don't have any formal rules. They don't have any decision makers, like no managers or chiefs or bosses, or
no vice president.
no vice president. So these are small societies where people collaborate without having these hierarchies. And for a long time, people found this really difficult to accept. So during the 90s, especially, there were so many social anthropologists just trying to figure out how did the hierarchical structure look like, because there had to be one, and they couldn't find one. So my question was, the more I studied this, my first question was, don't they have any leaders and followers? And the more I worked with studying these groups, the more I realized that they do, but leadership and followership looks very different from what we're used to, or the way that we describe and define leadership and followership. So if I give you an example, in these societies, they tend to hunt and gather individually. That works fine. But sometimes they need to sort of work together to bring down a larger game. So what they do then is, if they decide to hunt together, they will sit down and they will have a discussion on how to proceed. Now, this society is so small that everyone sort of knows who are the really good hunters, who are the lucky hunters. And these individuals can't tell the group how to conduct or how to do the hunting, or rules on who will go first or how to find the game, etc. They can only come up with ideas and suggestions. And the rest of the group will then make a decision. So in this case, it's the group that decides what the vision is or the goal is. And then it's the group that decides who they're going to follow. So it's smarter for the group to follow the individual who they know is the best hunter. But this is it's only useful to follow this individual when hunting. Like delivering a baby, it might not be the smartest idea to send in the biggest hunter. Or, if you want to solve a conflict, it might be smarter to use someone who's really good at getting people to collaborate. So they use something that I call rotating leadership, meaning that the group will constantly follow different individuals depending on what they want to achieve. It's the smartest way for people to actually achieve success in a group. We do this as friends, in our families or with friends. We have the same sort of behavior. We tend to listen to the one that sounds like he or she knows exactly what they're talking about, or that we know is good at something.
Thank you for that. The example of the friend group is so relatable, as you point out. There's no CEO, there's no fixed hierarchy in that group. There's actually a brilliant definition of a friend that I came across in my theater training, which is that a friend is someone with whom you can trade status, meaning who leads and who follows is always changing. And I can totally imagine thousands of years ago why that skill would have evolved to be the norm when every day is a question of survival. And let's be honest, this very recent, just a couple thousand years old experiment in rigid hierarchy, the survival forecast is not looking so great, right? I'm not sure that this rigid system has much to recommend it.
Less than 10% of our existence we've lived with decision makers and managers and chiefs and whatever. So it's a fraction of our existence that has been devoted to this. So I think when we're looking at leadership in that sort of perspective, we're missing out a lot on what is natural to us.
I'm drawn to your comment about the size of these groups, that they were small, always less than 100 people, so that everyone knows who's the best person for each task at any given moment. I can't help wondering whether the scale of our organizations and groups and nations, for that matter, has something to do with their hierarchical organization and the hierarchical culture we've created. I mean, maybe that's a chicken or egg question, or it's just something else entirely, but perhaps we'll come back to it later. I do want to ask you now to give us your perspective on where we are in the present moment, however we may have gotten here. Mm-hmm. You noted that a company or a sports team or an army is somewhat of an artificial structure. So what happens to leadership and followership in a hierarchical structure compared to an organic one that you've just described? How does leading and following get distorted? What are the costs of imposing these fixed structures on ourselves?
I think there's a combination of things, and three of them are really important. The first one is that we assume leadership is synonymous with directing people mm-hmm. or making decisions. And because we assume this, we have a leadership industry that is targeting decision makers. The marketing behind it is really smart because they target these individuals and basically says, you're really important. Mm-hmm. So if you invest money and time in yourself by, attending these leadership trainings, you'll get more people to do as you want them to do. So it sort of boosts the ego a little bit, I think. Mm-hmm. And not everyone will be happy with me, but that's sort of my take on it. So that's one aspect. And it means that we target people who make decisions. The other issue here is that somewhere along the line, we've sort of turned the whole leadership focus into what we can call a hunt for the holy grail of leadership. Meaning, we seem to have this idea that there's a recipe out there, and if you just follow it, you will be able to make anyone follow you. And this is why you'll find articles that says, 10 steps to become a great leader. And then you'll have another one that says 7 steps to become a great leader. And I always find this really amusing because I'm thinking, why would I choose 10 steps when I can do it in 7? You'll never find an article where it says 10 steps to make a few people follow you. So we're getting constantly this marketing idea that leadership is a recipe, and if you just figure out how to use it, then you can make anyone follow you. And then you're back to the first one, meaning you'll gain a lot by learning this recipe. So these two aspects are really important. But the third one is perhaps even more important. So the third one says that we study leadership in non-natural environments, like the workplace or in politics, etc. So we study leadership in these kind of environments. And I usually, in workshops and in lectures, I compare this to, or I ask the participants to imagine that, okay, if you want to study the natural behavior of lions, where would you do that? So you have two options. You can either study lions in a zoo, or you can try to study them in the wild. And so far, I haven't met a single person who says that studying lions in a zoo is a really good idea to discover their natural behavior. Everyone sort of agrees that it's in that natural environment. So if it's so obvious for us when we study animals, why don't we do it when it comes to us humans? It creates a problem because then we study leadership and followership in the workplace where, like I said, there are formal rules, there are contracts that tell you when to work, how to work, who you're going to report to, etc. You have all of those factors that influence how you behave. And so because we do the studying in these kind of areas, it just sort of reinforces the idea that leadership is synonymous with directing others and making decisions. So we have this circle where we constantly just sort of go round and around and just keep focusing on leadership.
Thank you for laying all of that out for us. It does seem that we've gotten ourselves into a kind of vicious cycle where we keep trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, so to speak.
Exactly.
If I'm understanding your theory correctly, humans are actually not made to function well or optimally in very rigid hierarchies. So how do we reclaim some of that natural followership and leadership ability and make some tangible adjustments to improve our current situation right now in this moment in history, until we get to the part where we restructure our entire civilization?
That's a great question. And it's a really interesting and exciting one because due to the fact that we don't focus or we haven't focused on natural leadership and natural followership, it means that we have an entire world to explore. So there's so much we can do. The point of, and I think this is important to mention before I try to answer your question, the whole point of why we lead and follow each other is to build something I call collaborationship. And a lot of times I feel like when we talk about leadership, we talk about as that being the main focal point of success. That's how we build success. But the only reason we lead and follow each other is to create something, is to collaborate, is to achieve something together. So that's the focus in my work. And with that in mind, any work that we do in a company where we try to relax a little bit, not focus so much on who's leading and how they're leading and who's following and how they follow, but rather focus on achieving something together. If we just relax a little bit, I think a lot of these aspects will come natural to us because we do it in our daily, private lives. So you do it when you hang out with your friends. I bet you don't have a CEO there. So maybe you do, but I've never met anyone who says, yeah, no, my friend, she's CEO for 3 years, and then we're going to swap, and then I'm going to be CEO. No one's doing that. Among friends, we do it naturally. So if you have a group of people and you let them collaborate without someone interfering too much, they will often surprise you. They can often achieve a lot more than we dare to believe.
Before we go into some examples, which I am excited to get to, I wonder if you could just speak a little more about collaborationship. I love this word. And, a lot of us talk about collaboration and working together. It's like there's buzzwords out there, teams, team dynamics, but you have a really, specific and deep understanding of what that means, what it feels like. So I'd love to have you just sketch that out a little more for us.
Okay, so back to our ancestors and these egalitarian band societies. So when they were sitting around the fire and they were making decisions, they were always trying to make use of each other's skills and competences to achieve the best results for the group. So this process, I found that to be really interesting, because in psychology, there's something called social loafing, which is basically the idea that if you have a group of people working together, they will perform a little less when they work in a group than they'll do when they work individually. And the guy who came up with the concept was Max Ringelmann, a French engineer. He asked a number of people to pull a rope individually, and he would calculate, he would measure how much weight they could pull. And then he asked them to do it together as a group, and he found that they were actually pulling a little less than they did individually. So he came up with this concept of social loafing. What's interesting is no one asked how sexy is it to pull a rope. I mean, it's not very interesting to do that, I suppose. I would guess that if these guys were on a boat and it starts sinking and they need to sort of get out of there, and the only way to get out of there is to pull a rope, I'm pretty sure they would pull as hard as they could. So when I looked at these band societies and how they interacted, I found that they were trying to build synergies in order to maximize the chances of reaching a mutual goal or a vision. And that process is what I call collaborationship.
I really want to underline something you're pointing to here, because I think it gets overlooked. And it's just, what's the reason we have to do something? What is our reason? I think this is often where we start to make erroneous conclusions or flawed experiments like the social loafing. Why am I pulling that rope in the first place? Is it because my manager told me to do it? Do I care about it? Is there anything in it for me? It reminds me of the research on intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and why the intrinsic, or the internal personal reason, is almost always the stronger one. So reasons like because my manager told me to, or because it's my job, these are not really very strong motivations compared to because it matters to me, because I believe in it, because I think it's the best idea, because I have a personal interest, etc. Those are always going to be stronger. Now, this is probably a whole conversation on its own, but the fact that people perform differently based on their own goals or their own interests, that should not surprise us at all. But still, somehow we forget about it when we're in these hierarchical structures where there's some assumption that because you're an employee or because a director somewhere above you made a decision, then you should just perform your best at all times, regardless of the circumstances. And that strikes me as pretty unnatural.
You're spot on. And this is really interesting, because I think the idea, when I mentioned the holy grail of leadership, I think the reason we're chasing it is because we believe that if we just have that recipe, if we just know exactly how we're going to get people to follow us a little better, they will feel motivated. They will feel this engagement in whatever they're doing. And that's not really how we work. I mean, I enjoy working out, but not every day. And there are times when I'm in a bad mood, or when I have a headache. And it was the same with our ancestors. I mean, in these egalitarian societies, just because someone is a really good hunter doesn't mean it's always logical to follow that individual. There will be days when, he's been fighting with his wife, or his kids have been crying, and or he's sick or something like that. And he's just not in the mood. So being flexible and focusing on getting people to do what they want to do, I think that's really the key to success in any group.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I always get this little like cringe of annoyance when I hear someone say like, well, it's your job, you're supposed to do it because it's your job. I'm like, I don't know if I fully understood why that bugged me before, but I think now I'm kind of getting clear on it, right? It's because there's an assumption that because you're in this box, I say and you do, and like that's just the end of it. But like that's so dehumanizing. And so then you also see the opposite response, like that's not my job or that's not your job. It's like the same problem, just are you playing offense or defense?
And now you're actually turning into a really interesting discussion, namely the fact that we have an enormous craving for freedom. And as individuals, we want to be free. And there's this idea that people like to follow leaders. They like someone to tell them what to do, but that's not true. It's just not true. We like to follow people who can help us get us where we already want to go. So I think this is a really important aspect. As soon as you create an environment where people feel like they're not free, they will start reacting to it. Psychological reactance. Kids do this from an early age. I think it's like 1 year old. That's when they start reacting to parents telling them what to do. It's in our blood to be autonomous. And so whenever we end up in a situation where we're not, we react.
Yeah. Thank you for that piece. And okay, at the risk of going off on another tangent, I just love what you said here. We like to follow those who can get us where we want to go. That makes so much intuitive sense. It sounds like an answer to your original question, like what makes me want to follow. I wonder if you came to any other conclusions about yourself or, humans when you ask yourself that question for last 15, 20 years.
Oh, that question has led me to so many aha moments. I'm just not the same person I was when I started. So our desire and the need for freedom is one aspect of it. The fact that in natural followership, the group sets the vision, not a leader. I can really recommend people to dive into this topic because it's really fascinating.
I love the idea that the group sets the vision. It really gives a lot of weight to followership, right? To the followership role. Because you could argue, I suppose, that everyone in a group is a follower, right? You're following a vision or a goal or something, and then you choose the leader that's going to take you there the fastest or the most safest or efficient way. At least that's what I'm getting from you.
Yes. And this is also interesting from the perspective of or when you read books on leadership, and even books that has nothing to do with leadership whatsoever, they will talk about the importance of individual leaders. And they will say things like, the world would have been different if Hitler hadn't, lived, or Mahatma Gandhi hadn't been alive, or Martin Luther King, the world would have looked different. I'm not sure if that's completely true. Yeah, the world would have looked a little different, but when it comes to changing the world, it's not leaders who do it, it's the followers. So I truly believe that there's so much more power in followership than we understand, because without, and I think it was Robert E. Kelly who said it brilliantly, without followers, Hitler would just be sort of like a lunatic running around shouting and making a lot of noise. So yeah, I think we should have a great deal more focus on followers.
It does really beg the question, and this is just, I'm just thinking out loud here about, like if a Gandhi or a Hitler figure or a King figure, if it wasn't that one individual, would the group have raised up another individual, right, to do that work, to forward that goal? I don't know. This is purely like speculative at this point, but it makes me wonder that.
Yeah, I think yes would be my guess on it. And if you look at what's going on today in the world, it's a bit shaky. We see in various countries right-wing groups are getting a lot more attention and a lot more power. And this is driven by people supporting these individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how and why, that's a really complicated discussion. But I truly believe that it's not one individual who just gets people to do what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, that would be imagining that there's this holy grail of leadership.
Right.
And I tend to ask people in workshops, etc. Imagine if you could upload all of the information that's out there concerning leadership. Would you be able to make every single person in the world follow you? What do you think? I mean, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
So if it's not possible, then why are we acting as if it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're kind of poking some really important holes in these myths, and I so appreciate the clarity on it. Just in the interest of time, I do want to give some time to share some examples of work that you've been doing with real live companies that have, made some adjustments and how they work together. Could you share maybe some examples of those?
Absolutely. So, for example, Valve Software, a really interesting company to look at. It's a video game developer. And they have this idea that you can go online and have a look at their website, and you'll get some really good ideas on how you get people stimulated to work together and collaborate. So they have desks with wheels,
Mm-hmm.
and basically when you get started, you look what project does sound interesting to me. You sort of wheel your desk over there, and you participate in that group. And so that's a really interesting example. Another interesting example is Birdsong, which is a Dutch healthcare organization. They started off with, I believe it was like 12 nurses. And you mentioned that it's problematic if you're a large group, then maybe that's when you need a hierarchy. But they've sort of figured a way around this. So what they do is they have smaller groups of nurses who controls an area, and they decide how they're going to work, how they set up their schedules, etc. They're very autonomous in their areas. So that's also a very good example to look at. In Sweden, we have a company called Björn Lundén Information, and the guy who started that company, we've worked together in a few workshops, and he's a fascinating old man now. And he wanted to run a company that was natural. That was sort of his take on it. And he created an environment where people actually set their own salaries. So they will decide how much they feel that they're worth, and then how much their neighbor or their colleagues are worth. So they have this way of collaborating and setting their own salaries. He told me he was surprised every year that it actually worked. But people are not stupid. So they figure out that if I demand too much, it won't be good for the company. So that's also a very good example. A company that I work for now, we've tried, and very successfully, to let staff that works within operations do the recruitment of their fellow colleagues. So we have 2 case handlers. They do the initial recruitment or interviews, and if they like a candidate, that will go on to the manager. That's how they hire them. So there's so many ways that you can incorporate natural followership. But I think a key step is that those who are managers must sort of step back a little bit, must have the courage to be a manager without having to lead all the time. So I think that's a very important aspect here.
Thank you for disproving my assumption about large groups. I'm very excited to know that that is false, and that we can sort of segment into cohorts, right? And then have like many cohorts working together. I have a feeling some of those examples, as cool as they are going to sound kind of scary, right? To people like, what? The employees set their own salaries? How is that possible? Yet you proved that it works. I wonder if you could speak a little to that fear. Like, what is it that makes us nervous? Is it just unfamiliar? Is it control, or what's going on there?
I've been thinking a lot about this, why we're so afraid of trying new things. And I think part of it is how we've structured our businesses today. If you have a hierarchy, the further up you get in a hierarchy, the easier it is for you to sort of fall back down again. Mm-hmm. The higher up you get, the more you need to sort of protect your position. And that means taking risks that you're comfortable with. Now, taking a risk where you let your employees set their own salary, if that doesn't work, everyone will say, you're an idiot. You could have figured that out by yourself. Why did you do it? So no one really dares to try this. Mm-hmm. Also, when it comes to fear, the salary thing is really funny because people get really interested in that aspect of it. But I've noticed that when I give workshops or do workshops or have workshops with employees, people who are not actually managers, but just regular employees, they love it when I sort of criticize managers and the leadership industry. They love the whole part. And then they love the idea about freedom at work, etc. And then I come to the point where I start talking about the salaries. You can see in their faces that, this guy, they like me. Up to that point where I say the salaries are open. So everyone knows what everyone else is earning. Mm-hmm. And the CEO basically earns as much as the guy packing the books. That's when they no longer really like the idea. It's just not as interesting. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because the idea that someone knows how much you earn, and that's just kind of creepy. Mm. And Björn was thinking a lot about this, and he said to his employees, well, why don't we just, since we're open with how much we earn, why go through the whole hassle? Why not just let everyone earn the same salary? And the funny thing is, he was always voted down on this. I mean, no one liked the idea. Mm-hmm. And I think that's partly because we like freedom, but we also like to be treated fairly. Mm-hmm. And if everyone earns the same, it doesn't matter how much you work or how good you are at your work, etc. That's not fair either. So people want to have these differences. Mm-hmm. I understand what people are afraid, some people more than others. So my suggestion is take it in small chunks, just start off with something easy, begin with having your managers step back a little bit, mm-hmm. and let other people lead in a group. Mm-hmm. The manager doesn't always have to set the goals. Ask the group, what goals do you want? These kind of simple questions that aren't really dangerous to anyone. That's a really good place to start. And then you build it from there.
Thank you. That is a fantastic place to start. Just building in a little bit of that rotating leadership. And I think even for a lot of managers, that's not such a big leap, right? Because there's already such an emphasis on team building and discussion. And so going that little extra step of sharing the leadership, it sounds like doable and also a real tangible shift in the human dynamic. Thank you for that. I want to ask you just one question to kind of take us out of the workplace, because how do you see the leader-centric view of human functioning affecting us, in our civic life, in our governance systems? Like, what's going on there? And do you feel like we also need to look at followership in that realm?
Absolutely. I believe that this focus on leaders and leadership, the single-minded focus on leaders and leadership is really causing a problem, and we're not really realizing it. So politics is a great example. So we believe in democracy, I hope. And the idea behind democracy is power of the people and the rule of the majority. So we believe that in our core, we send our young men and women to die for democracy. But at the same time, we're utterly convinced that people need to be guided. So I have these two conflicting ideas. People need to be guided, and rule of the majority. So these two are conflicting. And we don't seem to realize this. And what's happening at the moment is we're getting more and more attention on political leaders. So we'll have situations where Biden will say, I'm the Democratic Party. He's not the Democratic Party, but very few people react to it. And you'll have, in elections, you'll talk about individuals winning the election, but very rarely, it's not an individual who's winning the elections. It's a party. So this focus on individuals is becoming a problem. And to give you just a simple example, in Sweden, the Green Party has had two spokespersons instead of a party leader. And they've had this since the 1980s. And no one has had a problem with that until about a year ago. They started talking about the importance of getting rid of these two because people can't, if you have two leaders, people get confused. That's sort of the terminology being used here in Sweden, which is really interesting. The Green Party was at its best when they had two spokespersons, and it's been not so great when they started talking about having one party leader. So yes, it's affecting us in many, many different ways, and we should be careful, and at least we need to be aware that we're being affected by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for sharing this introduction to natural followership. And before we close, I want to throw out one last suggestion to listeners, which is to use your inspiring question, what makes me want to follow someone else, as an exercise. This seems like a great way to start a discussion in your own classes or with your own team. Finally, Chris, how can folks get in touch with you and learn more about your work?
I would say that the simplest way is to reach me either via our website, followership.se, or my LinkedIn profile. I think that would be the simplest way of getting in touch with me. And I hope they do.
Yeah, we'll put those both in the show notes, and we'll have to have you back next year when your book comes out. I look forward to that. And until our next conversation, thank you again, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music, and a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.